Every father knows the weight of looking into his child's eyes and wondering if he's doing enough. For Liam Torres, that weight had become unbearable as he watched his young daughter eat cereal for dinner again while he juggled 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. When a letter arrived from a fancy law firm claiming he'd inherited $1 from a father he never knew, Liam threw it in the trash. Just another joke from life. But the next morning, a black car pulled up to his apartment. A lawyer stepped out and said something that changed everything. The dollar was never the gift, it was the key. Hours later, Liam stood on a private island staring at a glass mansion his billionaire father had left him. But the real inheritance wasn't the money or the property. It was a choice that would define the rest of his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the thin walls of apartment 4B at 5:30 in the morning, just as it had every weekday for the past 3 years. Liam Torres rolled out of bed with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to function on 4 hours of sleep. His calloused hands, weathered from years of construction work, reached automatically for the work clothes draped over the single chair that served as his closet. In the next room, 7-year-old Ella slept peacefully, her dark hair spread across a pillow that had seen better days. She clutched a stuffed elephant, a garage sale find that had become her most treasured possession. Liam paused in her doorway, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. These quiet moments before the chaos of the day began were precious. To him, stolen glimpses of innocence in a world that had shown them little mercy. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling their small kitchen with the only luxury Liam allowed himself. He'd learned to make do with the cheapest ground coffee, but he refused to start his day without that first bitter sip that promised energy for the marathon ahead. While it brewed, he checked his phone for any last-minute schedule changes from his employers. Construction site from 6 to 2, evening shift at the warehouse from 4 to 9, Saturday catering gig for extra cash. The routine was punishing, but it kept them afloat. Barely. "Daddy," Ella's sleepy voice drifted from her bedroom. "Morning, sunshine," Liam called softly, pouring his coffee into a travel mug. 5 more minutes, okay? Then we'll get you ready. For school, their morning ritual was choreographed by necessity. Ella would dress herself while Liam packed her lunch, usually a peanut butter sandwich, an apple if they were lucky enough to find them on sale, and a juice box. She'd learned not to ask for the elaborate lunches some of her classmates brought. She understood, with the wisdom that comes too early to some children, that they were different. "Look what I made yesterday," Ella said, padding into the kitchen. In her worn pajamas, she held up a piece of construction paper covered in crayon strokes. "It's our dream house." Liam knelt down to examine his daughter's artwork. She had drawn a large house with multiple windows, a red door, and what appeared to be a garden filled with flowers. 2 stick figures stood in front, one tall, one small. A yellow sun beamed down from a blue sky dotted with puffy white clouds. "Tell me about it," he said, settling into the moment despite the clock ticking toward his departure time. "See, this is your room." Ella pointed to a large square on the 2nd floor. "And this is mine, right next door, so I won't be scared. And this," she indicated a sprawling area behind the house, "is where we'll have a garden. We can grow our own apples and maybe even cookies." Liam smiled despite the ache in his chest. "Cookies don't grow on trees, sweetheart." "Well, maybe we could plant some anyway and see what happens," she said, with the unshakable optimism of childhood. "Mrs. Rodriguez says if you believe in something hard enough, sometimes the universe listens." Mrs. Rodriguez lived in apartment 3A and had become something of a grandmother figure to Ella. The elderly woman often watched her after school when Liam's shifts ran late, refusing any payment beyond the occasional grocery store run. The building was full of people like Mrs. Rodriguez, working families, retirees on fixed incomes, immigrants chasing their own versions of the American dream. They looked out for each other because nobody else would. "The universe has been pretty quiet lately," Liam said, helping Ella into her school clothes. "But maybe it's just saving up for something big." He said it to make her smile, but part of him wondered if he was lying to her about hope itself. 3 years ago, their world had been different. He'd owned a small carpentry business specializing in custom cabinets and home renovations. Sarah, his wife, had worked as a nurse. They'd lived in a modest house with a backyard where Ella could run and play. Life hadn't been perfect, but it had been theirs. Then came the medical bills. Sarah's cancer arrived without warning, aggressive and merciless. The treatments that might have saved her weren't covered by their insurance. Liam had liquidated everything, the business, the house, their savings, but it hadn't been enough. Sarah died on a Tuesday morning in October, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a little girl who still asked when Mommy was coming home. The bankruptcy had followed quickly. Liam found himself starting over at 32 with nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and a daughter who needed him to be everything he wasn't sure he could be. The apartment in Riverside Terrace wasn't much, but it was clean and safe, and the rent was manageable as long as he kept working. "Daddy, you're thinking too loud again," Ella said, tugging on his sleeve. She had Sarah's intuition, an ability to read his moods that sometimes unsettled him. "Just planning our day," he said, forcing brightness into his voice. "Ready for the adventure?" Their morning walk to Lincoln Elementary took them through the heart of their neighborhood. Riverside Terrace wasn't the worst place in the city, but it wasn't winning any beauty contests either. The buildings were older, the streets showed their age, and the corner market still had bars on its windows from troubles that predated their arrival. But there was life here too. Mr. Kim swept his storefront every morning and always waved to Ella. The teenage girl in apartment 2C practiced violin by her open window, filling the courtyard with tentative melodies. Mrs. Patterson tended a small garden between the buildings, coaxing vegetables from stubborn soil. "I told Jenny about your work," Ella said as they walked. "She didn't believe that you built things." "What did you tell her?" "That you're magic with wood. That you can make anything. Tables, cabinets, whole houses if someone asked you to." Liam's throat tightened. He had been good with wood once. His hands had known the grain of oak, the flexibility of pine, the richness of mahogany. He'd created pieces that would last generations. Now his hands knew concrete and steel, the impersonal materials of industrial construction. The creativity had been replaced by simple endurance. "Maybe someday I'll show you some of the things I used to make," he said. "Why can't you make them?" Now, the question hung in the air between them. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that dreams sometimes have expiration dates? That sometimes survival requires abandoning the parts of yourself that made life worth living? Sometimes we have to wait for the right time, he said finally. They reached the school gates, where other parents were dropping off their children. Liam noticed the differences, the newer cars, the name-brand clothes, the easy confidence that came with financial security. He used to be one of those parents. Now he stood slightly apart, aware of his work clothes and calloused hands. "Have a great day, sunshine," he said, kissing the top of Ella's head. "Mrs. Rodriguez will pick you up, okay? I'll be home by 9:30. Will you read to me tonight?" "Always." He watched her disappear into the building, her backpack bouncing with each step. She turned back once to wave, her smile lighting up, her entire face. That smile was worth every aching muscle, every exhausting day, every moment of doubt about whether he was enough. The construction site was a 40-minute drive across town, where a new office complex was rising from what had once been a shopping mall. Liam worked as a general laborer, moving materials, operating machinery, following the directions of foremen who were often younger than him but had never owned their own business. The work was honest and necessary, but it required him to check his pride at the gate each morning. His lunch break was spent in his truck, eating a sandwich while reviewing the evening shift schedule at Peterson Warehouse. The transition between jobs required military precision, no time for traffic delays or unexpected complications. He'd learned to keep spare uniforms in the truck, along with energy bars and instant coffee, for the moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. The warehouse job was different from construction, less physical, more monotonous. He loaded delivery trucks, managed inventory, and tried not to think about the clock moving toward 9 o'clock when he could finally head home. The supervisor, a man named Danny who'd worked there for 15 years, had a habit of scheduling overtime at the last minute. Liam couldn't afford to say no, even when it meant arriving home after Ella was asleep. By the time he pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Terrace that evening, the sun had already set. The building's windows glowed with the warm light of families settling in for the night. Children's voices echoed from the courtyard, where an impromptu game of tag had broken out under the streetlights. Mrs. Rodriguez met him at the stairs, her weathered face creased with concern. "Ella ate dinner with me," she said. "Chicken and rice. She did her homework too, though she kept asking when you'd be home." "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I don't know what we'd do without you." "Family takes care of family," she said, patting his arm. "That little girl adores you, mijo. Don't forget that." Inside the apartment, he found Ella asleep on the couch, her school book still spread across the coffee table. She'd fallen asleep reading, a picture book open across her chest. Liam carefully gathered her up, marveling at how light she felt, how completely she trusted him to keep her safe. After tucking her into bed, he sat at their small kitchen table and opened the mail that had accumulated during the day. Bills, mostly. Utilities. Rent, medical payments from Sarah's treatment that would follow them for years to come. At the bottom of the stack was an envelope with an embossed letterhead he didn't recognize. Whitmore, Ashford and Associates. The return address was in the financial district downtown, a part of the city Liam rarely visited. The paper was thick, expensive. His name was typed in elegant font across the front. Inside, the letter was brief and formal. "Mr. Torres, we represent the estate of Mr. Vincent Torres. According to our records, you are the beneficiary of an inheritance. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of this bequest. The amount in question is $1, 1 tazura. Sincerely, Marcus Whitmore, Esky." Liam read the letter twice, then laughed out loud, a sound that held no humor. $1. Someone had paid lawyers in downtown offices to track him down and inform him that he'd inherited a single dollar from a man he'd never heard of. Vincent Torres. The name meant nothing to him. His own father had disappeared when Liam was barely 2 years old, leaving behind only a name on a birth certificate and a lifetime of questions. His mother had remarried when he was 5, and his stepfather had been the only father he'd ever known. When people asked about family, he thought of the man who'd taught him to use tools, who'd come to his baseball games, who'd walked him down the aisle at his wedding. This Vincent Torres was a stranger, and his dollar inheritance felt like a cosmic joke. What kind of person left $1 to someone they'd never met? What kind of lawyers handled estates worth $1? He crumpled the letter and tossed it toward the trash can, but his aim was off. It landed on the floor beside the refrigerator, where Ella's latest drawing was displayed with a magnet shaped like a butterfly. The contrast struck him, his daughter's hopeful vision of their dream house beside a crumpled letter from a dead stranger. Later that night, as he lay in bed listening to the sounds of the building settling around him, Liam thought about the letter, $1. In a world where he counted every penny, where he knew the exact cost of a gallon of milk and whether they could afford name-brand cereal, someone had left him $1. Maybe it was meant to be insulting. Maybe this Vincent Torres had known something about him that warranted such a deliberate slight. Or maybe the old man had been eccentric, leaving random amounts to random people for reasons that made sense only to him. Either way, it didn't matter. $1 wouldn't change their lives. It wouldn't pay for Ella's college fund, or fix the leak in their bathroom ceiling, or buy the dream house she'd drawn with such careful detail. He closed his eyes and tried to push the letter from his mind. tomorrow would bring another day of construction work, another evening at the warehouse, another night of falling into bed exhausted. The routine was harsh, but predictable, and predictability was something he'd learned to value. In her room, Ella slept peacefully, her stuffed elephant tucked securely under her arm. On the kitchen table, her homework remained neatly stacked. Math problems completed in careful handwriting, a book report about a girl who lived in a castle. Tomorrow she would wake up with the same bright optimism, the same unwavering faith that good things could happen to people like them, and in the morning that crumpled letter would still be lying on the kitchen floor, waiting to change everything. The black sedan was impossible to ignore. It sat in the parking lot of Riverside Terrace like a panther among pigeons, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun with an almost aggressive gleam. Liam noticed it as he walked Ella to school, but assumed it belonged to some social worker or government inspector making their rounds through the building. "Fancy car?" Ella observed, pressing her face against the chain-link fence that separated their complex from the street. "Do you think a movie star lives here now?" "I doubt it, sunshine," Liam said, but he found himself glancing back at the vehicle as they continued their walk. In a neighborhood where most residents drove cars with more rust than paint, the sedan stood out like a diamond in a toolbox. When they returned from school drop-off, the car was still there. A man in a charcoal suit leaned against it, checking his watch with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of confident posture that came from years of commanding rooms full of people. Mrs. Rodriguez was sweeping her front steps, but her attention was clearly focused on the stranger. "He's been asking about you," she said quietly as Liam approached. "Very polite, but he has that look, you know, like police or lawyers." Liam's stomach tightened. In his experience, unexpected visits from men in expensive suits rarely brought good news. He thought of the medical bills still arriving sporadically, collection agencies that sometimes hired investigators to track down assets they couldn't seize. "Mr. Torres." The man approached with measured steps, extending a business card printed on paper so thick it felt like cardboard. "Marcus Whitmore. We corresponded yesterday regarding the estate of Vincent Torres." The mahogany-colored card bore an address in the financial district and a phone number with no area code, the kind of subtle details that suggested serious money. Liam stared at it, remembering the crumpled letter he'd left on his kitchen floor. "I threw your letter away," Liam said bluntly. $1 isn't worth whatever your hourly rate is." "The dollar was never the inheritance, Mr. Torres. It was simply the legal mechanism required to establish your connection to the estate." Whitmore's smile was professional, but not unkind. "The actual bequest is considerably more substantial." "I don't understand. Your father was a careful man. He structured his will to ensure that only his legitimate heir would claim what he left behind. The dollar inheritance was, think of it as a test. Most people would dismiss such a small amount and never follow up. He was counting on your curiosity, eventually overcoming your skepticism." Liam looked around the parking lot, suddenly aware that their conversation was drawing attention. Mrs. Patterson had emerged from her garden to water plants that clearly didn't need watering. Two teenagers who should have been in school were lounging by the mailboxes, listening intently. "My father died when I was 2, Liam said. "Car accident. That would be your stepfather, Michael Torres, who legally adopted you when you were 5. Your biological father was Vincent Torres. He never married your mother, but he's been aware of your existence your entire life." The words hit Liam like a physical blow. His mother had never mentioned another man, had never suggested that the father who'd raised him wasn't his biological parent. When he'd asked about his real father as a teenager, she'd simply said he was gone and that Michael was the only father who mattered. "You're lying. I have documentation if you'd like to see it. Birth records, DNA tests conducted when you were a child. Your mother's permission was obtained through a considerable financial settlement that helped fund your early education and health care. Whitmore reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. Inside were photocopied documents, a birth certificate with Vincent Torres listed as father, medical records, even photographs of a younger man who shared Liam's dark hair and strong jawline. Your father was a private man, Mr. Torres. He built a considerable fortune in real estate development, but he lived quietly. When he learned about your mother's financial difficulties after your wife's illness, he wanted to help, but he respected the life you'd built. He waited until after his death to make contact. Liam's hands shook as he flipped through the papers. There were bank records showing payments to St. Mary's Hospital where Sarah had been treated, payments he'd never known about. Legal documents establishing a trust fund for Ella's education. Photographs of a man who looked like an older version of himself, standing beside construction sites and architectural models. This is impossible, Liam whispered. Your father purchased a private island in the Caribbean 12 years ago. He's left it to you, along with the resources to maintain and develop it as you see fit. The estate is worth approximately $47 million. The number was so large, it seemed meaningless. Liam tried to process it, but his mind kept returning to the medical bills on his kitchen table, the second notices and final warnings that had become wallpaper in his life. There has to be a catch. Only one. The inheritance comes with a condition that the property be used to help others, families in situations similar to your own. Your father envisioned it as a retreat, a place where people could rebuild their lives without the pressures they face here. Whitmore handed him another document, a detailed architectural plan showing a tropical island with a main house, guest quarters, workshops, and gardens. It looked like something from a dream, impossibly beautiful and completely unreal. I need to get to work, Liam said, though his shift didn't start for another hour. I can't process this right now. Of course, these are significant revelations. However, there is some urgency to the matter. The island requires immediate attention. Hurricane season is approaching, and there are maintenance issues that have been deferred. If you're interested in claiming your inheritance, we should arrange travel within the next few days. Travel to see the property, to understand what your father built and what he's asking you to do with it. Liam looked up at his apartment building, at the chipped paint and cracked concrete steps. Mrs. Rodriguez was still watching from her doorway, concern evident on her weathered face. In a few hours, he would need to leave for the construction. Sight then rushed to the warehouse for his evening shift. Ella would eat dinner with Mrs. Rodriguez and fall asleep waiting for him to come home. I can't just leave. I have responsibilities, jobs, my daughter. Arrangements can be made for your daughter's care. As for your employment, Mr. Torres, if you accept this inheritance, you'll never need to work for someone else again. The idea was so foreign that Liam couldn't even imagine it. He'd been working for other people his entire adult life. First, in his carpentry apprenticeship, then building his own business, then the desperate scramble of the past 3 years. Freedom from that cycle seemed as impossible as flying. I need time to think. Of course, but not too much time. The estate has obligations that must be met, and the legal window for claiming inheritance closes in 30 days. Whitmore returned the documents to his briefcase and handed Liam another card. My direct number. Call when you're ready to see what your father built for you. The lawyer climbed into his sedan and drove away, leaving Liam standing in the parking lot with a business card in one hand and a head full of questions. Mrs. Rodriguez approached slowly, her eyes filled with the cautious hope of someone who'd seen too many disappointments. Good news, mijo? I don't know, Liam said honestly. Maybe. I really don't know. That evening, after another day of moving concrete blocks and loading delivery trucks, Liam sat at his kitchen table with the documents. Spread before him, Ella was asleep, her homework completed and her teeth brushed, her stuffed elephant tucked securely under her arm. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional footstep from the apartment above. He studied the photograph of Vincent Torres, his father apparently. The man had kind eyes, but a reserved expression, as if he were holding back something important. In one photo, he stood beside a massive construction crane, wearing a hard hat and work clothes. In another, he was dressed formally at what appeared to be a charity event, shaking hands with people in expensive suits. $47 million. The number still seemed impossible, like something from a lottery ticket or a Hollywood movie. But the documents looked legitimate, and the lawyer had known details about their life that weren't public record. Liam picked up his phone and dialed the number on Whitmore's card. It rang once before a familiar voice answered. "Mr. Torres, I was hoping you'd call." "The island," Liam said. "When can I see it?" The private jet was smaller than Liam had expected, but infinitely more luxurious than anything he'd ever experienced. Leather seats the color of caramel, windows that seemed to frame the clouds like artwork, and a flight attendant who addressed him as Mr. Torres, with the kind of respect usually reserved for people who owned things like private jets. Liam pressed, his face to the window as the mainland United States disappeared beneath them, replaced by an endless expanse of blue-green ocean. He'd flown commercially twice in his life, once for his honeymoon with Sarah, once to his stepfather's funeral, but this was entirely different. The silence, the smooth ride, the sense that time moved differently at 30,000 feet. "First, and time in a private aircraft?" asked Marcus Whitmore, who sat across from him, reading what appeared to be legal documents. "First time, a lot of things," Liam admitted. "Yesterday I was worried about making my rent payment. Today I'm flying to an island I supposedly own. The adjustment period can be challenging. Your father went through something similar when his first development project succeeded beyond his expectations. He told me once that sudden wealth was like learning a new language. Everything familiar became foreign." Liam tried to imagine his biological father, this Vincent Torres, who'd built an empire and left it to a son he'd never met. The photograph in the legal documents showed a man who could have been Liam's older brother. Same dark hair, same strong, and same way of looking directly at the camera as if measuring its intentions. Why didn't he ever contact me? He tried, initially. When you were 7, he hired investigators to find you and your mother. By then, she'd remarried and you were thriving in a stable family environment. Vincent made the decision that disrupting your life would serve his needs rather than yours. So he just watched from a distance? He ensured you had opportunities, the scholarship that covered part of your trade school education. That was Vincent. When your carpentry business needed startup capital, he arranged for a bank loan with favorable terms. After Sarah's diagnosis, he made sure the medical bills didn't destroy you completely. Liam's throat tightened. He remembered the mysterious donor who'd covered Sarah's final month of treatment, the anonymous gift that had allowed her to die at home rather than in the hospital. He'd assumed it was charity from the church or a mistake in the billing system. He was there the whole time, in the ways he could be without interfering with the life you'd chosen. The island appeared gradually, first as a dark smudge on the horizon, then as a distinct shape crowned with green vegetation. As they descended, Liam could make out beaches of white sand, a harbour with a single dock, and buildings that seemed to emerge organically from the landscape itself. The main house was a marvel of glass and stone that somehow managed to look both modern and timeless. It perched on a small hill overlooking the ocean, its walls seeming to flow into the natural rock formations. Gardens surrounded it, bursting with tropical flowers and fruit trees. A path wound down to the beach, where a smaller guest house sat nestled among palm trees. "Welcome to Sanctuary Island," Whitmore said, as their plane touched down on a small but well-maintained airstrip. Mrs. Chen met them at the landing strip, a compact woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to managing complex operations. She wore simple work clothes, but carried herself with quiet authority. "Mr. Torres," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Elizabeth Chen, the island's caretaker and manager. Your father spoke of you often." He did every week for the past 12 years. He called every Sunday evening to check on the island's progress and always asked the same question. Do you think Liam would like what we're building here? They climbed into an electric golf cart and began the tour. The island was larger than it had appeared from the air, roughly 50 acres of varied terrain, including beaches, dense tropical forest, and cultivated gardens. The main house commanded the highest point, but there were several other structures scattered across the property. Your father designed everything with families in mind, Mrs. Chen explained as they drove. The guest quarters can accommodate up to 12 families at a time, each unit completely private but connected to the common areas. There's a workshop where he hoped fathers could teach their children useful skills. The gardens provide fresh food year-round. The workshop was Liam's first real surprise. It was a carpenter's dream, perfectly organized tool stations, wood storage that would be the envy of any craftsman, and workbenches worn smooth by years of use. The walls were lined with hand tools that looked both well-maintained and frequently used. Vincent spent hours here, Mrs. Chen said, running her hand along a workbench. He said working with wood kept him connected to something real. These are some of the pieces he made. She showed him a collection of furniture that took Liam's breath away. A dining table crafted from a single piece of mahogany, its grain flowing, like water across the surface. Chairs that seemed to have grown from the wood rather than been cut from it. A child's rocking horse, carved with such detail that it seemed ready to gallop. He was good, Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. He learned from watching you. What? Mrs. Chen smiled gently. He visited your carpentry shop several times before you lost it, posed as a potential customer interested in custom cabinets. He said watching you work taught him more about craftsmanship than any book or class ever could. Liam picked up a hand plane from the workbench, feeling its weight and balance. The tool had been cared for with the devotion of someone who understood its purpose. His father had touched this same tool, had shaped wood with these same hands that Liam had inherited. They continued the tour, visiting guest quarters that were comfortable without being ostentatious, a dining hall designed for communal meals, and a medical facility equipped to handle minor emergencies. Everything was beautifully designed but practical, built with the needs of real families rather than wealthy tourists. The island is self-sufficient, Mrs. Chen explained. Solar power, rainwater collection, organic gardens, even a small fishing fleet. Your father wanted to ensure that families staying here could focus on healing rather than worrying about expenses. How many people work here? A core staff of 8, but most of us live on the island full-time. We're not just employees, we're the island's first family. On a hillside overlooking the workshop, they found a small cemetery with a single grave. The headstone was simple granite with an inscription that read, Vincent Torres, builder, father. He gave his son the tools to finish what he started. Liam knelt beside the grave, overwhelmed by the weight of connection to a man he'd never known, but who had shaped his life from the shadows. The photograph in the legal documents hadn't captured the scope of what Vincent had built, the vision he'd held for bringing families together in this place of healing. He died 6 months ago, Mrs. Chen said softly. Cancer, like your wife. He fought hard, but mostly he worried about whether you would understand what he was trying to give you. I don't know if I do understand. He left you something in the house, a letter. Maybe that will help. As they drove back toward the main house, Liam tried to process the enormity of what he'd inherited. It wasn't just money or property. It was a vision, a responsibility, a chance to continue something meaningful that his father had started. But it was also terrifying. He was a man who'd struggled to manage his own small life, and now he was being asked to oversee something that could impact dozens of families. In the distance, the workshop stood open to the tropical breeze, its tools waiting for hands that understood their purpose. Somewhere in the main house, a letter from his father waited to explain what Liam couldn't yet comprehend. And back in a small apartment in Riverside Terrace, Ella was probably doing her homework with Mrs. Rodriguez, drawing pictures of dream houses that suddenly seemed less impossible than they had 24 hours ago. Vincent's study occupied the top floor of the main house, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Caribbean that seemed to stretch to infinity. Unlike the rest of the house, which felt designed for multiple families, this room was intensely personal. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on architecture, child psychology, and family therapy. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface worn smooth by years of use. Mrs. Chen had left him alone here with a cup of coffee and a gentle reminder that dinner would be served whenever he was ready. The letter she'd mentioned sat on the desk, his name written across the envelope in careful handwriting that somehow looked familiar, despite coming from a stranger. Before opening it, Liam explored the room that had clearly been his father's refuge. The books told a story of a man trying to understand something beyond business and construction. Titles like Healing Trauma in Children and Building Resilience in Broken Families suggested Vincent had researched his vision with the same intensity. He'd applied to real estate development. A series of leather-bound journals occupied one shelf, their spines labeled with years spanning the past 2 decades. Liam pulled down the most recent volume and opened it to a random page. March 15th. Watched Liam's interview on the local news about the community garden project he organized. Sarah was beside him, Ella playing in the background. He has her eyes when he smiles. I see myself in his hands when he demonstrates proper soil preparation. He's become the kind of man I always hoped to be, but never learned how. The Island Project feels more urgent now. How do I give him something that honors who he is, rather than imposing who I was? Liam's breath caught. His father had been watching, documenting, caring from a distance for years. He flipped to other entries, finding observations about his carpentry work, concerns during Sarah's illness, pride in small moments that Vincent had somehow witnessed or learned about. October 3rd. Liam carried Ella piggyback through the park today while she pointed out different types of trees. He's teaching her to notice the world around her, to find beauty in ordinary things. This is what I want the island to foster, parents who have time to see wonder through their children's eyes. January 12th. The medical bills are destroying him, but he hasn't missed a single day with Ella. Watched him help her with homework at the library, both of them sharing a single hot chocolate because money is tight. Made another anonymous payment to the hospital. Wish I could do more without interfering. Each entry revealed the depth of Vincent's longing to be part of his son's life, while respecting the boundaries he'd set for himself. Liam could feel his father's love and frustration radiating from the pages, the ache of watching from the shadows. While his son struggled with challenges that money could have easily solved, finally he opened the letter. My dear son, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've made the journey to see what I built for you. I hope you understand that everything here grew from watching you love Ella, the way I wished I'd been brave enough to love you. I was 22 when your mother told me she was pregnant. I was terrified, not of being a father, but of being the kind of father my own father had been. He was a hard man who showed love through criticism and expressed care through control. I convinced myself that walking away was the noble choice, that you'd be better off without someone so fundamentally broken. Your mother was right to let Michael adopt you. He was everything I wasn't, present, stable, emotionally available. But that didn't stop me from wanting to know the man you became. The island started as a fantasy, a way to imagine what I might have given you if I'd been part of your life. But as I watched you build your own family, lose Sarah, and keep fighting for Ella despite overwhelming odds, I realized the island couldn't be about my regrets. It had to be about your strengths. You have a gift for seeing people who feel invisible. Remember the homeless veteran you hired for your carpentry crew when no one else would give him a chance? The way you organized the neighborhood food drive after Mrs. Patterson's husband died. The patience you showed teaching woodworking to those teenagers from the detention center? This island is meant to amplify that gift. Families arrive here broken, by circumstances beyond their control, medical crises, job losses, deaths that shatter everything familiar. They need what you needed after Sarah died: time to grieve, space to heal, and the presence of someone who understands that rebuilding a life requires both practical skills and emotional support. The infrastructure is complete, but the soul of this place can only come from you. I've provided the tools, workshops, gardens, comfortable housing, professional support staff. What families need now is someone who knows what it feels like to love so completely that you'll sacrifice everything to protect it. I don't expect you to forgive my absence or to understand choices I can barely justify to myself. But I hope you'll consider continuing what we started here together. You through your example, me through the resources I was finally able to contribute. There's a condition in the legal documents that the island must serve others, but that's not really why I built it. I built it because watching you be the father I never learned to be convinced me that love finds a way to complete itself across generations. The workshop is yours now. The tools know the touch of our shared hands. Show other fathers what you showed me from a distance, that building something beautiful requires patience, skill, and the faith that broken pieces can become something stronger than they were before. Your Father Vincent. Liam read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of meaning. His father hadn't just left him money or property. He'd left him a purpose that grew directly from who Liam already was. The island wasn't about changing his life. It was about expanding it. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. Ella asked me to tell you she drew a picture of your adventure. She's very proud of her daddy, the explorer. The message was followed by a photo of Ella's latest drawing, a small airplane flying toward an island where 2 stick figures stood side by side, one tall and one small. She'd labeled it Daddy's Island Dream in careful 7-year-old handwriting. From the study window, Liam could see the workshop where his father had learned carpentry by watching him from a distance. Tomorrow, he could walk down there and run his hands over tools that Vincent had chosen with care, wood that had been selected for its beauty and strength. But tonight, he needed to call his daughter and tell her about the glass house that wasn't a dream anymore, about the island where broken families could come to heal, about the grandfather she'd never met who'd built all of this because he believed in the power of second chances. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway with a dinner tray, her expression carefully neutral. Good news or difficult news? She asked. Both, Liam said, folding the letter carefully. Definitely both. That sounds about right for this family, she said with a smile. Vincent always said the best gifts come with the most responsibility. Outside, the tropical evening was settling over the island, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that looked too beautiful to be real. Somewhere in the distance, Liam could hear the sound of waves against the shore and the gentle rustle of palm fronds in the breeze. This was his inheritance, not just money or property, but the chance to become the kind of father who could give. The father's hope. The weight of that responsibility felt enormous, but for the first time in years, it felt like weight he wanted to carry. The construction blueprints covered every surface of Vincent's desk, like pieces of an enormous puzzle. Liam had spent the morning studying them, trying to understand the scope of his father's vision for Sanctuary Island. What he'd initially seen as a completed project was actually only the foundation. Vincent had designed phases of development that could accommodate up to 50 families at a time. Mrs. Chen found him hunched over the plans, comparing electrical schematics with architectural drawings. Your father used to sit exactly like that, she said, setting down a fresh cup of coffee. Same posture, same expression of intense concentration. These plans, Liam said, gesturing at the blueprints, they're not just about building structures. Look at this. He pointed to a detailed drawing of the children's area. The playground equipment is designed for different age groups, but it's all connected, so siblings can play together. And here, he moved to another section, the family housing units have soundproof walls facing the common areas, but shared. Gardens in the back. Privacy when you need it. Community when you're ready. Vincent spent 3 years consulting with family therapists and child psychologists to design those spaces. He wanted to understand how physical environment affects emotional healing. Liam pulled out another set of plans labeled Phase 2. These showed additional workshops, a small school building, and what appeared to be a medical clinic. How much of this exists already? About 60% of Phase 1 is complete. The workshop you saw, the main house, 6 family units, the dining hall. Phase 2 exists only on paper, and in the bank accounts Vincent established to fund it. The numbers on the financial documents still seemed surreal. Vincent had left not just the 47 million for the island itself, but an additional 30 million in construction and operational funds. The annual budget Mrs. Chen had prepared showed they could operate at full capacity while continuously improving the facilities. "I need to see how this actually works," Liam said. "Are there families here now?" 3 currently. Vincent was very selective about our first residents. He wanted to ensure the island could provide what they needed before expanding operations. Mrs. Chen led him to the guest quarters, where he met the Morrison family. David, a former teacher, who'd lost his job after his wife's cancer treatment bankrupted them. His 12-year-old son, Jake, and 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. David was in the workshop when they arrived, carefully sanding a small wooden box under the guidance of James, the island's resident craftsman. "Mr. Morrison, I'd like you to meet Liam Torres, Vincent's son." David looked up from his work, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Vincent's son? He talked about you constantly. Said you were the finest carpenter he'd ever seen." "I'm still learning about what my father built here," Liam said. "How long have you been on the island?" 3 months. We lost our house 6 months ago, been staying in shelters and with relatives since then. When the social worker told us about this place, it sounded too good to be true." Jake Morrison appeared from behind a workbench, his arms full of wood scraps. "Mr. Vincent taught me how to make this," he said proudly, showing Liam a rough but recognizable birdhouse. "Dad says when we get our own place again, we can hang it in our yard." The simple statement hit Liam unexpectedly hard. This boy, displaced from everything familiar, was still planning for a future that included a yard and a home. The island hadn't just given his family shelter, it had preserved their hope. "James has been teaching the kids basic woodworking," Mrs. Chen explained as they walked. "But he's getting older, and the demand is growing as more families arrive. Vincent hoped you might consider taking over the program." They visited the garden, where Linda Morrison was working alongside Maria Santos, a single mother whose husband had died in a construction accident. Their children, Sophie Morrison and the Santos twins, chased butterflies between the vegetable rows while their mothers discussed seed varieties and harvest schedules. "The garden feeds everyone," Linda explained, her hands dark with rich soil. "But more than that, it gives us something productive to do while we figure out what comes next. For the first time in months, I'm not just surviving, I'm contributing to something." The third family was harder to reach. Tom Bradley and his teenage daughter Amy had arrived 2 weeks earlier after losing everything in a house fire that had claimed Tom's wife and Amy's mother. They kept to themselves, joining communal meals but otherwise remaining in their quarters. "Grief affects everyone differently," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Tom blames himself for not saving his wife. Amy hasn't spoken since the fire. Vincent always said the island had to provide space for all kinds of healing, including the kind that happens in silence." That evening, Liam called Ella from his father's study. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright with excitement. "Daddy, Mrs. Rodriguez showed me where you are on the map. Are there really palm trees?" "Lots of palm trees, sunshine, and beaches and gardens where they grow mangoes and papayas. Can I visit? The question caught him off guard. Of course she could visit. This was his inheritance, his decision to make. But accepting that reality meant accepting that their lives had fundamentally changed, that the struggle and limitation that had defined their existence no longer applied. Would you want to visit? I want to see everything you're seeing. Mrs. Rodriguez says, adventures are better when you share them with people you love. After ending the call, Liam walked down to the workshop where David Morrison was still working, despite the late hour. The man looked up as Liam entered, his hands stained with wood oil. Couldn't sleep either, David asked. Too much to process. My father left me something incredible, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to manage it. Vincent worried about the same thing. He told me once that he'd built something bigger than himself and worried whether anyone else could understand his vision. David set down his sandpaper and leaned against the workbench. You want to know what I think? I think he didn't leave you this place because you were qualified. He left it because you understood something he'd spent his whole life trying to learn. What's that? How to be a father when everything falls apart. How to keep your family together when the world tries to tear it down. How to build something beautiful out of broken pieces. Liam picked up a wood plane from the tool rack, feeling its familiar weight. I keep thinking about all the ways I could mess this up. What if families come here and I can't help them? What if I make promises I can't keep? Then you'll be like every other parent trying to do something impossible, David said with a slight smile. The difference is, here you'll have help. Outside, the island was settling into its nightly rhythm. Security lights illuminated the paths between buildings, ensuring safe passage for late-night walks or emergency needs. In the family quarters, children were being tucked into beds that belonged to them for as long as they needed shelter. Parents could sleep without worrying about next month's rent or whether they'd have enough food for breakfast. Vincent had built more than a retreat. He'd created a laboratory for rebuilding broken lives. And somewhere in the complexity of blueprints and budgets and human need, Liam was beginning to see how his own skills and experience could serve something larger than himself. The island needed what he had to offer. But more than that, he was starting to understand that he needed what the island could teach him about turning inheritance into legacy. Ella's voice message arrived at dawn, transmitted through the island's satellite communication system with crystal clarity that made her sound closer than the 2,000 miles that separated them. Liam lay in his father's bed, his bed now, listening to his daughter's recorded words as tropical light filtered through windows designed to catch the sunrise. Hi, Daddy. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me record this because I wanted you to hear something important. Yesterday at school, Tommy Martinez said his dad told him that poor people like us don't get to have adventures, that we just have to stay where we are and be grateful for what we have. But I told him that's not true, because my daddy is on a magical island right now, and he's going to help lots of families like ours have better lives. Her voice carried the fierce certainty that only children possess, the absolute faith in possibilities that adults learn to temper with experience. I know you're worried about whether you're good enough for this, but you're the best daddy in the whole world, and if your real daddy picked you for something special, then you must be even more special than I already knew. Mrs. Rodriguez says, I should tell you that we're proud of you for being brave. She also made me practice saying this word, legacy. She says you're not just getting something from your daddy, you're going to give something to other kids like me who need their daddies to believe in magic again. I love you to the moon and back and around the whole island. Come home soon, but not until you're ready to bring the magic with you. The message ended with the sound of Ella blowing kisses into the phone, followed by Mrs. Rodriguez's gentle voice. She is very wise, that little one. Trust her instincts, mijo. Children see the truth before adults remember it exists. Liam played the message 3 times, each repetition revealing new layers of his daughter's understanding. At 7 years old, she grasped something that had taken him days to process. This inheritance wasn't about what he was receiving, but about what he was being called to give. He found Mrs. Chen in the dining hall, reviewing applications from families requesting sanctuary on the island. The stack of papers was thick, each folder representing a story of hardship and hope that mirrored his own experience. "How many families are waiting?" he asked. 47 approved applications, with more arriving weekly. "We've been operating at reduced capacity while waiting for Vincent's heir to take charge." Liam flipped through the applications, reading abbreviated versions of familiar tragedies. Medical bankruptcies, job losses, house fires, deaths that shattered financial stability. Each file included photographs, fathers holding children, mothers with worried eyes, families trying to smile despite circumstances that would have broken their spirits. Vincent researched each family personally, Mrs. Chen continued. He wanted to ensure we could provide what they actually needed, rather than what we assumed they needed. One application caught Liam's attention. A single father named Robert Chen with twin boys, ages 9 and 11. The family had lost their home after Robert's construction company failed during an economic downturn. Medical issues with one of the twins had drained their savings, and they'd been living in their car for 6 weeks. "Any relation?" Liam asked, showing Mrs. Chen the application. "My nephew," she said quietly. "Robert's been too proud to ask for help, but his social worker submitted the application without his knowledge. The boys are sleeping in the back seat of a Honda Civic, Liam. They deserve better." The weight of decision-making felt enormous. Each family represented lives that could be transformed or further damaged by his choices. Vincent had built the infrastructure, but Liam would determine how it was used and who benefited from its resources. "What would my father have done?" Vincent would have asked, "What you think we should do?" He always said the island needed someone who understood struggle from the inside, not someone who had only observed it from a distance. That afternoon, Liam video-called Robert Chen, introducing himself as the new director of Sanctuary Island and formally inviting the family to stay. Robert's response, a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and the careful skepticism of someone who'd learned not to trust good news, reminded Liam of his own reaction to Marcus Whitmore's visit. "There's got to be a catch," Robert said, his voice crackling through the satellite connection. "Nothing this good happens to people like me. 3 weeks ago I was working 3 jobs and eating cereal for dinner with my daughter," Liam replied. "I understand the skepticism, but sometimes good things do happen to people like us. We just have to be brave enough to accept them." The conversation lasted an hour, covering logistics, expectations, and the island's philosophy of mutual support rather than charity. By the end, Robert had agreed to bring his sons to the island, though his voice still carried the wariness of someone afraid to hope. That evening, Liam called an island-wide meeting in the dining hall. The 3 resident families gathered around the large table Vincent had crafted from driftwood and reclaimed timber. Children played quietly in the adjacent room, while parents focused on what their host had to say. "I want to be honest with all of you," Liam began. 3 days ago, I didn't know this place existed. I inherited it from a father I never met, and I'm still figuring out what that means. But I'm learning that inheritance isn't just about what you receive, it's about what you do with what you've been given." David Morrison leaned forward. "What does that mean for us?" "It means I need your help. Vincent built the physical structure of this place, but you're building its heart. The families arriving next week are going to look to all of us for guidance about how to heal, how to hope again, how to rebuild lives that felt permanently broken." Maria Santos spoke up, her English accented but clear. "My boys ask me every day if we're safe here, if this is real, or if it will disappear like everything else has. What do I tell them? Tell them that broken things can be repaired if you have the right tools and people willing to help with the work," Liam said. "Tell them that this island exists because a man who made mistakes wanted to give his son a chance to make things better. Tell them that we're all learning together how to turn suffering into strength, Tom Bradley, who had remained silent through most meals since arriving, cleared his throat. "My daughter hasn't spoken since the fire. The therapists say she might never talk again. What if this place can't fix what's broken in us?" "Then we'll love you anyway," Liam said simply. "Some healing happens quickly, some takes years, and some takes forms we don't expect. This island isn't about fixing people, it's about providing a safe place for families to discover their own way forward." Amy Bradley looked up from her drawing, making eye contact with Liam for the first time since they'd met. She didn't speak, but she nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something unspoken but understood. The meeting ended with practical discussions about expanding garden space, scheduling, workshop time, and preparing for new arrivals. But underneath the logistics, Liam felt something else taking shape, a sense of community that transcended individual struggles, a collective commitment to proving that broken families could heal each other. Later that night, he stood on the beach where his father's ashes had been scattered 6 months earlier. The waves rolled steadily against the shore, carrying away the day's concerns and bringing tomorrow's possibilities. In 12 hours, Robert Chen and his twin boys would board a plane that would change their lives forever. Liam thought about Ella's voice message, about legacy and magic, and the courage required to believe in both. His father had given him more than money or property. He'd given him the chance to become the kind of man who could look at broken families and see their potential for healing. The island's first test was approaching, and Liam was finally ready to meet it. The legal document arrived by courier just as Robert Chen and his twin boys were settling into their family quarters. Liam was in the workshop, showing 9-year-old Miguel Chen how to properly hold a hand plane, when Mrs. Chen approached with an expression that immediately put him on alert. "There's been a development," she said quietly, holding an envelope. "With the familiar letterhead of Whitmore, Ashford and Associates. Mr. Whitmore needs to speak with you immediately." The boys were absorbed in their woodworking lesson, their father watching with the amazed expression of someone seeing his children smile for the first time in months. Liam didn't want to interrupt this moment of healing, but Mrs. Chen's urgency suggested the matter couldn't wait. "James, can you take over here? I need to handle something." In Vincent's study, Marcus Whitmore appeared on the video conference screen with his usual professional composure, but something in his manner suggested trouble. "Mr. Torres, I'm afraid. We have a legal complication. A man named Marcus Torres has come forward claiming to be Vincent's son and heir to the estate." The words didn't immediately register. "I'm sorry, what?" "Marcus Torres Jr. He's provided documentation showing that Vincent had a relationship with his mother, Carmen Torres, approximately 32 years ago. He's claiming equal inheritance, rights to the island, and all associated assets." Liam sat down heavily, trying to process what he was hearing. "You're telling me I have a brother?" "Half-brother, technically, and his legal claim appears to be legitimate. Vincent never mentioned him in our conversations, but the documentation is compelling. Birth certificate, DNA test from 1992, even some correspondence between Vincent and the mother. Where has he been all this time? Living in California, working in corporate real estate development. Apparently, he only learned about Vincent's death through an obituary in a business journal. When he researched the estate, he discovered the island and your inheritance." Whitmore's expression grew more serious. "There's more, I'm afraid. Marcus Jr. isn't interested in continuing the island's current mission. He's already approached several development companies about converting the property into a luxury resort." The implications hit Liam like a physical blow. Everything his father had built, everything the island represented to families like the Chens and Morrisons and Bradleys, could be destroyed by a half-brother who saw only commercial potential in Vincent's vision. What are his legal rights? Under the original will, the inheritance was meant for Vincent's surviving son. The language didn't specify which son, and the court will need to determine whether the estate should be divided or awarded to one heir over the other. How long do we have? Marcus Jr. has filed a legal challenge. You'll both need to appear in federal court in Miami next week. Until then, the estate is frozen. No major expenditures, no new commitments, no changes to the island's operations. After ending the video call, Liam sat in his father's chair, staring at the blueprints that covered the desk. Phase 2. Construction would have to wait. The families waiting for sanctuary would have to find other solutions. Everything Vincent had worked to create hung in the balance because of a son he'd never mentioned. Mrs. Chen found him there an hour later, still motionless among the architectural plans. "The families are asking questions," she said gently. "Word travels quickly in a community this small. What do I tell them? The truth. That you're fighting for something worth protecting." That evening, Liam called another community meeting. The dining hall felt different now, charged with uncertainty rather than hope. Robert Chen held his boys close, the expression on his face suggesting he was already preparing for another disappointment. "I need to tell you about a legal challenge to the island's ownership," Liam began. "I have a half-brother I didn't know existed, and he wants to sell the property to developers." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, David Morrison spoke up. "What does that mean for our families?" "I don't know yet. The court will decide whether I have the legal right to continue Vincent's mission, or whether the island will be sold for commercial development." "And if you lose," Maria Santos asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "then you'll need to find other places to rebuild your lives. But I want you to know that I'm going to fight this with everything I have." Tom Bradley surprised everyone by speaking. "My wife believed that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you. She died believing that our family would survive her loss and find a way to heal. This island gave us hope when we had none left. If someone wants to take that away from other families, then we fight." Amy Bradley looked up from her ever-present sketchpad and, for the first time since the fire, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "We fight." The meeting ended with practical discussions about legal procedures and timelines, but underneath the logistics, Liam felt something unexpected emerging. Not just his own determination to preserve his father's legacy, but a collective commitment from families who understood what loss meant and refused to accept it passively. 3 days later, Marcus Torres Jr. arrived on the island. He came by helicopter rather than the small plane most visitors used, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits who immediately began photographing the property and taking measurements. Marcus himself was tall and lean, with dark hair and sharp features that bore a striking resemblance to both Liam and the photographs of their father. "You must be my little brother," Marcus said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Quite a place Vincent built here. Must be worth, what, 60 million in the current market? It's worth whatever it costs to give families a chance to heal," Liam replied, not taking the offered hand. "Noble sentiment, but not particularly realistic. Do you know how many families could be helped with $60 million invested properly? This island serves, what, a dozen families at a time? We could fund programs that reach thousands." Marcus gestured toward the main house, the workshop, the carefully designed family quarters. "This is a rich man's guilt project, not a sustainable solution to poverty. Vincent was trying to buy forgiveness for abandoning his children, not create meaningful social change. You're wrong about him, and you're wrong about what this place means." "Am I?" "Look around, Liam. Beautiful facilities, expensive infrastructure, astronomical operating costs. This is a luxury retreat disguised as charity. The families here aren't learning to be self-sufficient. They're learning to be dependent on someone else's generosity." Marcus pulled out a tablet showing architectural renderings of a resort complex. "This could be an eco-luxury destination that employs hundreds of local workers, generates millions in tax revenue, and funds real social programs instead of this feel-good fantasy. These families aren't a fantasy. Their children aren't a tax write-off. No, they're not. They're people who deserve better than temporary shelter and false hope. They deserve jobs, education, and opportunities to build permanent solutions to their problems. The conversation continued for an hour, each brother presenting fundamentally different visions for their shared inheritance. Marcus spoke with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and bottom lines. His arguments were logical, his development plans professionally crafted, his vision of economic impact undeniably impressive. But Liam thought about Miguel Chen's smile when he successfully planned his first piece of wood smooth. He thought about Amy Bradley, speaking for the first time since losing her mother. He thought about families who needed time to grieve before they could rebuild, who required safety before they could take risks, who deserved love before they could trust again. "The court will decide," Marcus said finally, preparing to leave. "But I hope you'll consider what's actually best for everyone involved, not just what makes you feel good about continuing Vincent's mistakes." After the helicopter departed, Liam found himself standing in the workshop where Robert Chen was teaching his boys to sand properly, while David Morrison worked on a cabinet that would furnish their new apartment when they were ready to leave the island. "That man looked like you," Miguel Chen observed. "He's my half-brother. Is he nice, like you?" Liam considered the question carefully. "He wants different things than we do. Does he like families? He likes helping them in different ways." Miguel nodded thoughtfully, then returned to his sanding. "I hope you win," he said simply, as Liam watched fathers and sons working together with tools his own father had selected. He realized the legal battle ahead wasn't just about property, or money, or even family legacy. It was about two fundamentally different beliefs about how healing happens and what broken people need most. In 1 week, a federal judge would decide whether Sanctuary Island continued as Vincent's vision of refuge, or became Marcus's vision of economic development. The families who called it home would learn whether their sanctuary was permanent or just another temporary stop in lives already marked by too much loss. The stakes couldn't be higher, and Liam was no longer fighting alone. The federal courthouse in Miami gleamed in the morning sun like a fortress of marble and glass, its imposing architecture designed to remind visitors that justice was serious business. Liam stood on the steps, adjusting his unfamiliar suit, while Marcus Whitmore reviewed last-minute legal documents. Behind them, a small group had gathered. Mrs. Chen, David Morrison, and surprisingly, Robert Chen with his twin boys. "You didn't have to come," Liam told Robert. "This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," Robert replied firmly. "This island gave my sons their childhood back. Miguel hasn't had nightmares since we arrived. Lucas is talking about becoming a carpenter like you. If someone wants to take that away from other families, then it's absolutely our fight." 9-year-old Miguel tugged on Liam's jacket. "I brought something for you," he said, pulling a small wooden object from his pocket. It was a roughly carved elephant, clearly the work of young hands still learning to control their tools. "Ella told Mrs. Rodriguez that elephants never forget, so I made this to help you remember that we believe in you." The gesture nearly undid Liam's carefully maintained composure. He knelt down to Miguel's eye level, accepting the gift with both hands. "Thank you. I'll keep it with me." Inside the courthouse, they found Marcus Torres Jr. holding court with a team of lawyers in expensive suits and a small crowd of reporters who'd caught wind of the unusual inheritance dispute. He looked confident and professional, addressing questions about his development plans with the polished ease of someone comfortable in the spotlight. "The island has tremendous potential to serve the broader community," Marcus was saying to a reporter. "My brother's intentions are admirable, but 12 families at a time isn't a sustainable model for social impact. We're talking about creating hundreds of jobs and generating millions in economic activity." Liam's legal team was smaller but more focused. Besides Marcus Whitmore, they'd enlisted Sarah Chen, a family law specialist who'd worked extensively with child welfare cases, and surprisingly James Morrison, David's brother, who turned out to be a retired federal prosecutor with experience in estate law. Your half-brother's legal position is strong, James Morrison explained as they reviewed their strategy. He has legitimate claim to inheritance, and his development plans are financially sound. But inheritance disputes aren't just about money. They're about intent. We need to prove that Vincent specifically wanted the island to continue as a sanctuary. How do we do that? With these, Sarah Chen said, placing a thick folder on the table. Inside were dozens of letters from families Vincent had helped over the years, handwritten testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by his quiet philanthropy. Some were from families who'd stayed on the island during its early development, others from recipients of Vincent's anonymous donations to medical bills, school programs, and emergency assistance funds. We spent the weekend contacting everyone on Vincent's private charity list, Marcus Whitmore explained. These letters arrived by email and overnight delivery from families across the country. They're willing to testify about Vincent's commitment to helping struggling families. One letter particularly stood out, written by a woman named Patricia Williams, whose husband had died in an industrial accident, leaving her with 3 young children and overwhelming debt. Mr. Torres paid for my husband's funeral when I couldn't afford it. He covered my children's school expenses for 2 years while I went back to college. When I tried to thank him, he said he was just passing along help he'd received from someone else, and that someday I'd do the same for another family. That's what Vincent Torres believed in, not charity, but community. Not handouts, but hands up. The letters painted a picture of a man who'd spent decades quietly supporting families in crisis, always with the same philosophy: temporary help to enable permanent solutions, dignity preserved through mutual respect, children protected from their parents' failures and bad luck. This is our case, Sarah Chen said. Vincent's pattern of philanthropy shows clear intent. He didn't just give money, he invested in families' ability to rebuild their lives. The island is the culmination of that philosophy, not a departure from it. As they prepared for court, Liam's phone buzzed with text messages from Sanctuary Island. Mrs. Chen was sending updates about families who couldn't travel to Miami but wanted their voices heard. Tom Bradley had written a statement about how the island had given his daughter, Amy, the space to begin speaking again. Maria Santos had organized the other mothers to create a video testimonial about the children's garden and how working together in the soil had taught their kids about hope and growth. The media attention could work for us or against us, Marcus Whitmore warned. Your brother's development plans sound impressive to people who think in terms of economic impact. We need to help them understand that some things matter more than profit margins. During their lunch break, Liam stepped outside to call Ella. She'd insisted on staying home with Mrs. Rodriguez rather than missing school, but she'd made him promise to call with updates. "How's it going, Daddy?" "Complicated, sunshine. The judge has to decide whether the island should stay the way it is or become something different. What does your heart tell you?" The question surprised him. "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Rodriguez says, when grown-ups get confused about what's right, they should listen to their hearts instead of their heads." "What does your heart say about the island?" Liam looked back at the courthouse, where his half-brother was probably strategizing with his legal team about profit projections and development timelines. "My heart says families like ours deserve a place where they can heal without worrying about money or time limits or whether they're worthy of help." "Then that's what you should tell the judge." "It's not that simple, sweetheart. Sometimes hearts aren't enough. Maybe hearts are more enough than we think they are," Ella said with 7-year-old wisdom that cut straight to the truth. That afternoon, both sides presented their opening arguments. Marcus Torres Jr. spoke eloquently about economic responsibility, sustainable development, and measurable social impact. His PowerPoint presentation included charts showing job creation, tax revenue, and environmental benefits of ecotourism. His lawyers presented financial analyses demonstrating that the resort development could fund social programs, helping thousands of families rather than dozens. My father was a businessman who understood that good intentions without sustainable economics are just expensive sentiments, Marcus argued. The island can serve a much larger purpose than my brother's well-meaning but limited vision allows. When Liam's turn came, he approached the podium with Miguel's wooden elephant in his pocket and his father's letter in his hand. He spoke without notes, addressing the judge directly. Your Honor, 3 weeks ago I was a single father, working 3 jobs to keep my daughter fed and housed. I thought I knew what struggle looked like, what families needed when everything fell apart, but spending time on my father's island taught me something I hadn't understood. Healing isn't about quick fixes or economic solutions. It's about having time and space to remember who you are when you're not fighting just to survive. He talked about Amy Bradley, speaking for the first time since her mother's death, about Miguel Chen, sleeping through the night without nightmares, about parents rediscovering skills and confidence they'd thought were lost forever. My half-brother sees an underutilized asset that could generate impressive returns. But the families living there don't see numbers or projections. They see home. They see safety. They see proof that someone believes they're worth saving. The judge listened intently, asking pointed questions about financial sustainability, legal precedent, and operational details. Both sides presented compelling arguments, though from fundamentally different perspectives on how best to help struggling families. As court adjourned for the day, Liam felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Legal proceedings moved slowly, with testimony and expert witnesses scheduled for the remainder of the week. The island's future, and the futures of families who depended on it, hung in the balance of a decision that could go either way. Outside the courthouse, Marcus Torres Jr. approached his half-brother with an unexpected offer. "This doesn't have to be adversarial," Marcus said. "We could work together, develop part of the island for tourism, and maintain a smaller sanctuary program. You'd have resources to help more families, and the property would generate income to sustain operations long-term. At what cost? Compromise. The real world requires practical solutions, not idealistic gestures." Liam thought about Vincent's workshop, about the garden where children learned to grow vegetables, about the dining hall where families shared meals and stories and hope. Some things are worth protecting exactly as they are, and some things are worth improving, even if improvement requires change. They stood on the courthouse steps, 2 sons of the same father with irreconcilable visions of their shared inheritance. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more evidence, more arguments about what Vincent Torres had really wanted and what his sons owed to his memory. In his hotel room that night, Liam video-called the island for evening updates. The families had gathered in the dining hall for a potluck dinner, sharing food and conversation as if this might be their last night together as a community. Children ran between the tables, their laughter echoing through the room where their parents had learned to hope again. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Mrs. Chen said through the video connection, "you gave us something precious. You showed us that broken families can heal each other." As Liam prepared for bed, he held Miguel's wooden elephant and thought about his daughter's question about listening to his heart. Tomorrow, a federal judge would decide whether that was enough. 0. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Patricia Henley reviewed the final documents in the case of Torres versus Torres. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and the measured bearing of someone who'd spent decades weighing difficult decisions. For 3 days, she listened to testimony, examined evidence, and asked probing questions that revealed a sharp legal mind grappling with an unusual inheritance dispute. "This case presents the court with a fundamental question about intent," Judge Henley began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. Vincent Torres left behind significant assets and 2 sons, each with legitimate claims to inheritance and distinctly different visions for how those assets should be used. Liam sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands steady despite the tension, coiled in his chest. Beside him, Marcus Whitmore had arranged their evidence carefully: Vincent's letters, the architectural plans, testimonials from families whose lives had been changed by the island sanctuary. At the defendant's table, Marcus Torres Jr. conferred quietly with his legal team, their confident postures suggesting they believed their economic arguments had prevailed. The defendant's development proposal is financially sound and would generate substantial economic benefits, the judge continued. Mr. Marcus Torres Jr. has presented compelling evidence that resort development could create jobs, generate tax revenue, and fund social programs reaching far more families than the current sanctuary model serves. David Morrison, sitting in the gallery with his children, reached for his son, Jake's hand. Robert Chen's twins leaned against their father, their young faces reflecting the adult anxiety filling the room. These families understood that the judge's next words would determine whether their sanctuary remained available for others like them. However, Judge Henley said, her tone shifting slightly, inheritance disputes require the court to determine not just what is legally permissible, but what the deceased intended when structuring their estate. She lifted a document that Liam recognized as his father's will. Vincent Torres was a careful man who consulted extensively with legal counsel before finalizing his inheritance plan. The language of his will is quite specific about the island's purpose. It must be used to provide sanctuary and healing for families facing circumstances similar to those experienced by my son. Marcus Torres Jr.'s lawyer rose from his seat. Your Honor, our position is that resort development better serves that stated purpose by creating sustainable funding for family assistance programs. Counsel will remain seated, Judge Henley said firmly. The court has heard all arguments and is prepared to rule. The silence stretched impossibly long. Liam could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the collective breath-holding of everyone who'd traveled from the island to witness this moment. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap. Behind her, families who'd never met before this week had bonded over their shared investment in the island's future. The court has reviewed extensive documentation of Vincent Torres's philanthropic activities spanning 2 decades. The judge continued, the pattern is consistent: direct assistance to struggling families, always structured to preserve dignity while providing practical support. The island sanctuary represents the culmination of this philosophy, not a departure from it. She paused, scanning the courtroom with eyes that seemed to take in every face, every family whose future hung on her decision. Furthermore, the court has reviewed a previously sealed document that significantly impacts this case. Marcus Whitmore straightened in his chair. This was unexpected. No sealed documents had been mentioned during discovery or testimony. Judge Henley held up an envelope with Vincent's distinctive handwriting. This letter was left with the court system 10 years ago, to be opened only in the event of an inheritance dispute involving the island property. She broke the wax seal and unfolded the document, her expression revealing nothing as she read Vincent's final words to herself before sharing them with the courtroom. Vincent Torres wrote, "If my sons are fighting over this inheritance, it means I failed to make my intentions clear. The island is not a business opportunity or an investment portfolio. It is a promise to families who need what I needed but never found: time to heal without judgment, space to rebuild without pressure, and community that chooses love over efficiency." The words hit Liam like a physical force. His father had anticipated this conflict, had foreseen that his 2 sons might view their shared inheritance through irreconcilably different lenses. The son who understands this promise is the son who should control the island's future, Judge Henley read. Not because he is more deserving, but because he will protect something that cannot be measured in quarterly reports or development projections. She set the letter aside and looked directly at both brothers. However, Vincent Torres included, One additional provision that neither son was previously aware of. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Vincent Torres structured his will so that neither son can claim full inheritance without the other's cooperation. Both of you must agree on the island's future, or neither of you receives anything. The entire estate would be donated to the American Red Cross for disaster relief operations. The revelation struck both brothers simultaneously. Liam felt the ground shift beneath him as he realized his father had created a test, not of legal right or moral worthiness, but of their ability to find common ground despite fundamental differences. Marcus Torres Jr.'s confident expression faltered for the first time since arriving on the island. The judge's ruling meant that neither brother could simply overrule the other. They would have to negotiate, compromise, and somehow find a solution that honored both their visions of how to help struggling families. The court will recess for 24 hours to allow both parties to consider their options, Judge Henley announced. When we reconvene tomorrow, I expect to hear a joint proposal for the island's future, or I will be forced to execute Vincent Torres's contingency plan. As the gavel fell, Liam sat in stunned silence, trying to process what his father had really left them. Not just an inheritance, but a challenge to prove that two very different sons could work together to continue something bigger than either of them could achieve alone. The hotel conference room overlooked Miami's skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that neither brother was paying attention to. Marcus Torres Jr. sat at one end of the polished table, his development portfolio spread before him like battle plans. Liam occupied the opposite end, Vincent's letter and Miguel's wooden elephant positioned like talismans against defeat. Between them sat their lawyers, mediators, and the weight of 24 hours to find common ground or lose everything their father had built. "We're running out of time," Marcus Whitmore said, checking his watch. "The court reconvenes in 6 hours, and we need a unified proposal." "The solution is obvious," Marcus Torres Jr. said, his voice carrying the impatience of someone accustomed to quick decisions. "We partition the island. I develop the eastern shore as an eco-resort. You maintain the western side as your sanctuary. Both operations generate revenue. Both serve families in need." "That's not a solution," Liam replied. "That's two separate projects that happen to share the same piece of land. Vincent created something integrated. Families heal together. Children play together. Parents support each other. You can't divide community down the middle. Then what do you propose? Because walking away empty-handed doesn't help anyone." The question hung in the air between them. For 3 days, they'd argued their positions without finding middle ground. Marcus saw inefficiency, where Liam saw intimacy. Liam saw commercialization, where Marcus saw sustainability. Their father's final test seemed designed to prove that some differences couldn't be reconciled. "I need to understand something," Liam said finally. "Why do you want this? Really want it? You have a successful career, financial security. Why fight for an inheritance from a father you never knew?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his polished confidence wavering slightly. "Because he left me too," he said finally. "My mother told me he was a businessman who didn't have time for family. I spent 32 years thinking I wasn't worth his attention, that I'd failed some test I didn't even know I was taking. And then you found out about the island. And then I found out he'd been watching you your whole life while completely ignoring me. Do you know what that feels like? To discover that your father chose one son over the other? The raw pain in..." Marcus's voice surprised Liam. Behind the corporate polish and development presentations was a man grappling with the same abandonment issues that had shaped Liam's own life. "He didn't choose me," Liam said quietly. "He stayed away from both of us for different reasons. You had a stable life he didn't want to disrupt. I had a mess he felt responsible for helping fix. You think watching your son struggle from a distance is easier than ignoring him completely?" The question revealed the core of their conflict. Both brothers had felt abandoned by Vincent, but they'd interpreted that abandonment differently. Marcus had seen neglect where Liam had experienced Hidden support. Liam had felt forgotten where Marcus had been deliberately avoided. Maybe, Liam said, Vincent's final test isn't about the island at all. Maybe it's about us learning to be brothers. I don't need a brother. I need to prove that I'm worth something to the man who created me and then pretended I didn't exist. And I need to prove that families like mine deserve more than quick fixes and economic solutions. They stared at each other across the conference table, two sons of the same father carrying different wounds and different hopes. Outside, the Miami skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, indifferent to the family drama playing out 40 stories above the street. There's something else, Marcus said finally, reaching into his briefcase. Something I haven't told you. He pulled out a folder containing bank statements, legal documents, and what appeared to be medical records. Vincent didn't ignore me completely. When I was diagnosed with leukemia at age 16, someone anonymously paid for my treatment. When I needed a bone marrow transplant, a donor was found within weeks, unusual for someone with my ethnic background. Liam studied the documents, recognizing the pattern of anonymous assistance that had marked Vincent's relationship with his own family. He was there for you too, in his way, always at a distance, always anonymous, always careful not to interfere with the life I was building. But he was there. Marcus pulled out another document, a DNA test from 1992. The bone marrow donor was Vincent himself. He registered when I was diagnosed, waited 15 years to be matched. The transplant that saved my life came from our father. The revelation changed everything. Vincent hadn't abandoned either son. He'd protected both of them in the only way he knew how, from the shadows, sacrificing his own desire for connection to preserve their autonomy. So what do we do with that? Liam asked. Marcus looked out at the Miami skyline, then back at his half-brother. We figure out how to honor a man who loved us enough to let us find our own ways, but who still hoped we'd eventually find each other. The island needs both of our skills, Liam said slowly. Your business expertise could make the sanctuary sustainable long-term. My understanding of what struggling families actually need could ensure the programs serve real people instead of abstract concepts. A hybrid model, Marcus said, his tone shifting from defensive to thoughtful. Eco-tourism that funds and expands the sanctuary program. Visitors pay to stay in luxury accommodations while interacting with families who are rebuilding their lives. Cultural exchange instead of charity tourism. Families maintain their privacy and dignity while guests learn about resilience and community. The revenue stream supports expansion to serve more people. For the first time since meeting, the brothers found themselves building on each other's ideas rather than tearing them down. Marcus's financial acumen could solve the sustainability issues that had worried Liam. Liam's understanding of family trauma could ensure that any development served healing rather than exploitation. We'd need safeguards, Liam said. Families comes first, always. If the tourism operation ever conflicts with the sanctuary mission, the families win. Agreed. And we'd need transparency. No anonymous donors, no hidden assistance. Families know exactly what support is available and how the island operates. They worked through the evening, crafting a proposal that neither could have developed alone. The compromise agreement preserved Vincent's vision while ensuring its sustainability, honored both sons' strengths while requiring both to remain involved in the island's future. As dawn approached, Marcus Torres Jr. and Liam Torres walked into the federal courthouse not as adversaries, but as partners in continuing something their father had started but couldn't finish alone. Judge Henley reviewed their joint proposal with the careful attention it deserved, asking detailed questions about implementation, oversight, and long-term viability. When she finally looked up from the documents, her expression revealed approval. Vincent Torres would be proud, she said simply. The court approves this partnership and awards joint inheritance of the island property to both sons, contingent upon their continued cooperation in fulfilling the terms outlined in this agreement. Outside the courthouse, families from Sanctuary, Aylan celebrated a victory that felt larger than legal precedent. Two brothers had learned to work together, and their partnership promised a future that could serve far more families than either could have helped alone. The island's next chapter would be written by both sons of Vincent Torres, finally working together to complete their father's vision of healing. 6 months later, Sanctuary Island bustled with a rhythm that would have amazed Vincent Torres. The morning sun illuminated a bronze plaque newly installed at the island's main dock, its simple inscription reading, "Vincent Torres Memorial Sanctuary, where broken families learn to heal together." Below that, in smaller script, "Built by a father's love, sustained by his son's partnership." Liam stood on the workshop's deck, watching Ella help Miguel Chen plane a piece of mahogany while his twin brother Lucas measured boards with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that details mattered. At 9 years old, both boys had become confident young craftsmen under Liam's patient instruction. More importantly, they'd become the kind of children who slept peacefully through the night and woke up excited about the day ahead. "Uncle Marcus is here," Ella called out, spotting the approaching golf cart that had become her uncle's preferred method of island transportation. Despite initial awkwardness, the relationship between the half-brothers had evolved into something neither had expected: genuine friendship built on shared purpose and complementary skills. Marcus Torres Jr. climbed out of the cart carrying architectural plans and his ever-present tablet loaded with financial projections. The past 6 months had transformed him from a corporate development executive into something more complex, a businessman who'd learned to measure success in children's laughter as well as quarterly returns. "The Eco-Lodge construction is ahead of schedule," Marcus reported, spreading the plans across Liam's workbench. "First guests arrive next month, and we're already booked through the holiday season." The Eco-Lodge occupied the island's eastern shore, designed with luxury accommodations that would attract visitors willing to pay premium rates for the privilege of experiencing authentic family community. The revenue from tourism expanded sanctuary operations, allowing the island to serve 24 families simultaneously rather than the original 12. And more importantly, Marcus continued, the Martinez family just got word that Roberto's job training program landed him a position with a construction company in Phoenix. They'll be moving off island next week, but Roberto wants to stay connected as a volunteer mentor for new families. This had become the island's greatest success story. Families who'd healed enough to return to independent life but chose to remain part of the sanctuary community. Former residents like David Morrison now served as counselors for newly arrived fathers, while their children helped younger kids adjust to island life. The healing had become cyclical, with each generation of families helping the next. Mrs. Chen appeared from the main house, her arms full of letters that had become a weekly ritual. 43 new applications this week, she announced, including a family from your old neighborhood in Riverside, Terrace. Liam looked up sharply. The Pattersons? Their daughter Sarah, named after your wife, was injured in a car accident. Medical bills are overwhelming them, and Mr. Patterson lost his job while caring for her. Mrs. Rodriguez submitted their application and included a note saying you'd understand their situation. The circle felt complete. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd watched Ella during Liam's endless work shifts, was now helping other families find the sanctuary that had transformed their own lives. The woman who taught them about family taking care of family was extending that philosophy to neighbors who needed hope. "We'll make room," Liam said without hesitation. The workshop could use Mr. Patterson's electrical skills, and Sarah could help with the children's program while she recovers. Marcus nodded, already calculating adjustments to capacity and resource allocation. The brothers had learned to think as a unit, combining Liam's emotional intuition with Marcus's logistical expertise to serve families more effectively than either could manage alone. "There's something else," Marcus said, his tone shifting to the careful neutrality he used for significant announcements. The board of directors for the Vincent Torres Foundation wants to expand operations to a second island. The foundation had been Marcus's idea, a formal structure that could replicate the sanctuary model in other locations while maintaining the personal touch that made healing possible. Wealthy donors contributed not just money but time, visiting the island to understand how effective family support actually worked. "Where?" Liam asked. "The Pacific Northwest. A timber company is donating land after their CEO visited here and saw what we're accomplishing. Similar demographics to our current families, working-class people hit by economic disruption, medical crises, industrial accidents." The expansion represented everything Vincent had dreamed of but hadn't lived to. See, his sons working together to multiply his vision of sanctuary across the country. The model was sustainable, the results were measurable, and most importantly, the families were thriving. "I'd need to spend time there, help design the workshops and family spaces," Liam said. "We'd need to spend time there," Marcus corrected. "This partnership works because we both contribute what we do best. I'm not running expansion projects without your insight into what families actually need." Ella bounded up the workshop steps, her face bright with the confidence that had replaced the worried expression she'd worn during their years of struggle. "Daddy, Amy Bradley finished her first piece of furniture, a bookshelf for her new room. When they move to their apartment in Tampa, she wants you to see it before the dedication ceremony tonight." The dedication ceremony had become a monthly tradition. Families who were ready to leave the island presented projects they'd completed during their stay, usually pieces of furniture they'd crafted in the workshop. The ceremony marked transitions. From healing to independence, celebrated achievements both practical and emotional. Amy Bradley's bookshelf would join a growing collection of furniture that had traveled from Sanctuary Island to homes across the country. Each piece carried the island's spirit into new communities, reminding families that they'd learned to create beauty from raw materials, strength from broken pieces. As evening approached, the island's extended family gathered in the dining hall Vincent had designed for exactly this purpose. Current residents sat alongside former families who'd returned for the ceremony, creating the kind of intergenerational community that sustained itself through shared experience and mutual support. Tom Bradley stood beside his daughter as she presented her bookshelf, both of them transformed from the silent, grieving pair who'd arrived 8 months earlier. Amy spoke clearly and confidently about the craftsmanship techniques she'd learned, the patience required for fine woodworking, and the satisfaction of creating something useful with her own hands. "This island taught me that broken things can be repaired if you have the right tools and people willing to help with the work," Amy concluded, echoing words Liam had spoken during his first community meeting. "I'm taking these tools with me to Tampa, but I'm leaving part of my heart here for the next family who needs to remember that healing is possible." After the ceremony, Liam walked down to the beach where his father's ashes had been scattered. The workshop lights glowed warmly in the distance, and he could hear the sound of children's laughter drifting from the family quarters. Marcus found him there, both brothers standing in comfortable silence as they watched moonlight dance across the Caribbean waves. "Think Vincent would approve of what we've built?" Marcus asked. "I think he'd be amazed that his sons finally learned to work together," Liam replied. "The island was just the excuse to make that happen." Above them, the stars wheeled across a tropical sky that had witnessed transformation beyond anything Vincent Torres could have imagined when he'd purchased this land 12 years earlier. His dollar inheritance had become a legacy, measured not in money, but in families who'd learned to hope again, children who'd discovered their own strength, and 2 brothers who'd found each other by learning to serve something larger than themselves. The island's future stretched ahead like an uncharted ocean, full of families yet to be served, communities yet to be healed, and possibilities that grew from the simple truth that broken things could indeed be repaired with the right tools and people willing to help with the work.